Hello everyone. So as Susie says, my name's Nadia. I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about who I am, what I do, and why I approached Creative Works London back in 2013. So I am a woven textiles designer, artist, but also a retired performer, dancer. And I worked as a performer, as a professional dancer stroke performer for 10 years prior to going back to university to study woven textile design at Central St Martin's in London. So I decided to change my career and get a proper job. And the reason why I'm telling you that is because my work very much ties into my past career, I suppose. There's lots of transferable knowledge and skills and interests, I suppose. So I was studying at Central St Martin's. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Beatwoven. So I'm the founder and director now of a company called Beatwoven. It's I'd say it's a woven textiles label that's using digital technology to create new patterns for woven fabrics that are then used within art applications and used within interiors. They can be used for many things, but at the moment we're focusing on that. And the name of the company, Beatwoven, is a little bit of a clue about what it is. So when I was studying textiles at Central St Martin's, weaving, I started to see this sort of mathematical connection between music and weaving. And I used to feel like my loom was a piano. The mathematics, the counting was very similar. And I just started exploring that area a bit more. And when I lived in Ibiza for a bit as well, and I was going backwards and forwards to Ibiza, which is basically the digital music hub of the world. And I sort of saw firsthand from that, and also traveling previously with my previous career, how important music was in people's lives, and it's a universal language. But also, it just I was on the I was on the dance floor in at Space, and they had this laser show, and they looked like threads coming across the top of the dance floor, and they were all weaving in and out of each other to the time of to the music. So this was all happening at the same time, and I remember just looking and thinking, that looks like my loom. Like, I think I might be able to weave music. So, cut a long story short, I started researching and found a coder, and we created a software program that translates the patterns of music into a visual form that I then put into a loom, a weaving loom. So the idea is the patterns of fabric are actually coming from music, and we're fusing the textiles world, which is pattern, with the music world, which is also pattern. You just can't see it. And we're really interested in that way that then interplays in our lives, and how we then think about fabric if we know the pattern has come from one of our favourite songs, and how we can make that look beautiful in an interior space, and that then plays with new connections of experience and a connection and things like that. So that's kind of where I was there. So that was just the showing about. There's just so many connections. It's really interesting actually. So I graduated with that project, and it sort of snowballed. And then I came, it was like an epiphany really, because I thought, oh my God, we could decorate the whole world in musical patterns, and so because I was thinking of all the applications you can use for fabric. But there was 3 stumbling blocks mainly for me. I graduated in 2009, so it was the recession, and I had absolutely zilch money. I had minus money, and I already started thinking about, well, hang on, if I could take I don't know, any song, I don't know. I can't think of a song, my mind's gone blank. Let's Dance, David Bowie. And then I made it into something, and then I was selling it as that. Then what would happen with the, where does the boundaries lie with the copyright of the music artist? So that was the first sort of question. So there was like fun, and the software. So I kind of made this amateur sort of software with the coder, but I knew then that I need to sort of move that on. And there was some sort of slight issues with him as well, but that all sorted itself out. So there was like the software, the funding, and the 2 IP. These are pictures actually of, that was one of the first ever fabrics that I made. And the software actually sort of, it translates the sound into like pixels, which then fuse with the weaving, and the sort of pixels cluster and make other patterns from it. So then I was introduced to Creative Works London, and I approached them with the question of the software, and then obviously the IP, and then the funding sort of came as part of that as well. So the funding was really useful for me even to just start sort of production in terms of actually creating fabrics with a manufacturer, with a mill, but also to be able to work with the Queen Mary University London with coders to move the software on. And that's when I met Noam actually to help with the IP and where these boundaries laid with the copyright. And it was really confusing because for me, like I was I'm a textiles designer, you know, I didn't have any clue about legal stuff. So it was a massive black hole really that I was sort of jumping into. And it's also the language that you're using as well. So Noam was sort of talking in very sort of legal way, and I was sort of having to interpret that and understand how to use that going forwards. But I have to say that the projects that we worked on two projects actually, because we got the first round of funding and then we went for a second round of funding, because we realised that once we got through the first nitty-gritty bit, then there was another bit that we needed to look at. So we got to the sort of looking at my business model and working out, you know, how much of the process, how much am I putting into the process to create this final project, and how much of that creativity is coming from the actual music. But then we started looking at, but then how do I advertise with trademarks of the brand, of the name of the band or the name of the song. So we worked together again, and then we wrote 2 documents. And for me personally, it's absolutely was the best thing that I could have possibly done. It was imperative for what I'm doing. And a good example of that, which is just brilliant, I managed to, I've been working with Warner Music UK, and I ended up at a tech event in Oshie Island, and it was like you present your work, and it was the top 10 directors of Warner Music were there, and my biggest fear was talking to the publishers and the legal department of the music industry. And you know, they came straight up to my work and they were like, you know, well, what about this and what about that? And I was educating them on actually what I was doing and where the boundaries lie, and I could then turn it into, but then we could actually work together on this, and this is how we could work together, and that gave me gravitas anyway. So yeah, it was good because I could really handle every single question that was coming my way. And going forward, working with them further, where I've been having to sign quite complicated contracts and negotiate money things, like I've really been able to hold my own in knowing where those sort of boundaries are, because they haven't done the research. So it's all new to them. So that was really, really important part of my business. And I think there's still definitely areas to explore going forward, but yeah, it was definitely a really good starting point.
So I'm going to... You've kind of taken us to the end of the Creative Works London project, but that was, what, 3 years ago now? Two and a bit years ago.
Yeah.
And I'm aware, because I follow Nadia on Twitter and Instagram, and I would recommend that you do too, because apart from anything else, the images are just gorgeous. I'm aware that you've been working with fashion designers and recording artists, and kind of expanding a little bit from the IP questions into the resilience question.
Yeah.
asking bluntly, are you making money from your IP now?
Yeah.
And also it seems to me that you have so many things coming at you from so many different directions. From the point of view of developing your business and your business model, how is working in this VUCA, very fast changing, ambiguous environment, how are you meeting those challenges? Sorry, that's two questions.
So am I making money? It depends how to define making money. I'm making a living. Like last year, I think was my first year. I actually been able to pay myself a little bit of a wage, which was nice. And that was probably after about 3 or 4 years of literally living on nothing, and a lot of sacrifice. So, and that came from IP. Definitely. And then the second question was about how I manage. Could you say it again?
How you managed to, because I know when we first met you were working on a business plan, but what you're doing, where you are now is very different to where you were 2 or 3 years ago. Opportunities seem to come at you quite unexpectedly from unexpected corners. In terms of running a small business in a very fast-changing environment, what are your tips and hints for dealing with that?
Well, I've been, for me personally, it's I've had to put the time in. I'm definitely having to put the time in, and just being really adaptable and flexible to sort of what's coming at me. My business plan sort of is changing. It changes quite a lot, quite quickly. So, but it's important that I keep on that, because without a business plan, obviously you kind of like, you don't know where you're heading. So I have to keep coming back to my business plan all the time. I try and come back to it about a month to every 6 weeks. And then, I've got a business advisor as well, because I'm at a designer maker incubator in Holborn called the Cockpit Arts. And we meet up sort of every 4 to 6 weeks, as well as my mentor. I've got a mentor. And we're just constantly, talking about where the goalposts are changing and how we can kind of be flexible around that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to invite you to sit down and
Yeah.
pick Noam up, but there will be time to ask Nadia questions after Noam's spoken, so do be noting down your questions and so on. So Noam is going to tell his side of the story.
Thank you, Susie. And first, just to add a number of things before I will give you, or try to give you, some kind of a crash course on IP in 20 minutes, which is impossible. So obviously, we're just going to point at a number of red flags that you should pay attention to. But just a few words about the kind of stuff that I was fortunate enough to do with Nadia. And we talked about IP protection, and we talked about a lot of other things here. But at least to me, the first thing that I got, or the first impression that I got when I met Nadia, and then I was sure that I really want to work with her. It was and still is. It's her personality. It's not Beatwoven. I mean, she presented herself as being Beatwoven's founder and director. Beatwoven is her, so it was very, very genuine, and the passion that she feels for that. And I think that if you don't have it, it's really, really difficult to go through the stages that Nadia described, probably, and the sacrifice, only a small bit of which I'm aware of. So, okay. What I would do very quickly is just to go through the major, so I know more or less the profile, the type of creative industries profile that is sitting in this room, and just a few things about each of the intellectual property rights that may be relevant to you. Going back a little bit to what Nadia said, I think it's very true. It is very helpful when you think about things, whether you like IP or not, it's completely irrelevant. If you think about things in IP terms, you can be completely anti-IP, such as the open source movement. in software, but they are using IP in order to prevent people to use an IP against them. So you need to master it, and it helps to very useful, almost vital, I would say, to master it. So as Nadia said, once we established that the business model in substantial terms was viable, that she doesn't necessarily, under all circumstances or most circumstances, need to go and ask people's permission in order to use their music when Nadia converts this music to textile pattern. And one more thing, Nadia talked about converting it, and those of you who heard that may be under the impression that this is all the operation of software. So once the software is there, you chuck it into this, let's call it metaphorically a pipe, and on the other end you get the textile pattern. That is so Nadia has been very modest on that. That is only to an extent, but you need to have the creative input of the artist in order to get what you get in the end. If that would have been the case, if it's purely automatic, this would have been probably a little bit different also legally. But going back to that, once this business model was found to be viable, the next question was, okay, that's copyright, fine. But if I want to go and say to the world, right, that this is David Bowie, Let's Dance, a lot of other things are coming in. Leave the music aside. So you would have in a lot of countries questions of image rights and personality rights. Can you use the name David Bowie for commercial purposes? I mean, today is unfortunately deceased, without getting the permission of the Bowie estate. Many artists, many bands would actually register the name of the band as a trademark. Can you use someone else's trademark without their permission for commercial purposes? And if so, to what extent? So this was the second phase, business model viable. Right, now how do I tell the world about this viable business model? Because without it, it's very difficult, obviously, to make a commercial success of that, well, to sell. Okay, so I already mentioned copyright, and I guess that this is the right that most people are kind of familiar with. To a large extent, you don't have to worry. So first of all, you don't have to worry about any formalities. You probably know copyright does not require any registration. I mean, in the States, you can register it, and it is helpful to an extent, but not for for purposes of existence. So it exists anywhere in the world, irrespective of registration. What is useful or should be useful for you guys is, and that's a very practical advice, when something is created, as I said, because there is no registration like patent or trademark, so you don't go to a registry office and file an application, you don't get a stamp with a date. And therefore, when you have an argument with someone about whether that someone took something from you or not, question would often be, well, I came up with this design before you came up with it. So what I'm saying is paper trail. You create something, document it. The fact that this was created in a particular at a particular point of time. And that can be very useful, save you a lot of time and money if somebody's after you in saying, I was here first. All right, so now we talked about trademarks. So Nadia's brand name is registered as a trademark. And so two things. First of all, the idea that you have is not necessarily a protectable thing in itself. If it is, it's great. Many times, especially in our area, right, creative industries, the idea itself is not protectable. Also, Nadia's idea or epiphany is not protectable. So I would be rubbish at it, but let's leave that aside. I can come up with the same, or try to follow the same business pattern. What you do have, especially when you start early and you establish a reputation, is exactly that. You have a reputation that is associated with a trade name, and therefore you've been there. So that's the benefit of being a first entrant to the market under a certain banner. So doing these type of things, you established a reputation, protect it, and this you can do almost always, unless the name that you have chosen is unsuitable as a trademark, and this would usually be either if it's completely inappropriate for moral reasons, very rare, but mostly is if it belongs to someone else already, and this can be established by doing a quick search, or if it is descriptive, right? So I don't know, registering something like great would be very, very difficult. So in most cases, and it's sometimes worthwhile to think about it before you start investing your human capital into a particular name and establishing reputation, is with respect to which name do you want to establish reputation. If it's a protectable name, you're doing yourself a great service. All is not lost if you haven't done it. There is protection in this country and in the vast majority of other countries around the world for unregistered trade names. It is there is a much greater a degree of uncertainty with respect to such protection, way more expensive to protect it. And another benefit in having, for example, Beatwoven registered is that anyone that even dreams of doing something in this area would have to do his due diligence. Nadia said that I'm using a lot of legal terms, so I'm really trying to avoid it. But you have to look at what has been going on by going to a registry office and run a search. They see Beatwoven, that's a notice to the whole world. This name is already taken. This name and any name which is confusingly similar to that name. So there's another benefit in registering a trademark. It's a notice to the whole world. This is mine, if you would like. I mean, we often hear the name patents. Patents are not really relevant for, I think, this forum. This is about invention, technical invention. So if there are any questions during question time, we can do that, but I doubt it whether that would be really relevant for us. One type of right which is very relevant and often left aside, justifiably so, is designs rights, And designs rights you can gain now on a European level, on an EU level, very cost effective. So to register a design would cost you 320 euros or thereabout, right? Which would basically bite all over the European Union, the whole 28, soon to be 27, unfortunately, 28 member states. 320, and you don't have to satisfy any substantive criteria prior to filing. In other words, nobody, unlike trademarks or patents, nobody is examining your application for substantive in substantive terms. They just want to see, did you pay? Did you fill all the boxes? Fine. The fact that what you're actually filing is fairly generic is not going to stop you from getting the design. It's true. Try to enforce it. Somebody would challenge this right at that point, and then it can be removed. But there is also a benefit in having it on the books there in a completely legitimate way at an early stage, even if afterwards it is again a notice, if you would like. That is possibly. So in terms of protection here, we are talking about a couple of decades, so it's not bad. I mean, it's not copyright, which is like the life of the author plus 70, which in my view very excessive. But we are talking about a couple of decades. There is also an unregistered design right existing in the European Union for anything that has been made available to the public in the European Union, but this lasts only for 3 years, and this is effective only against someone that copies from you, while a registered design right is effective against anyone who has an identical, or let's call it very similar design to yours. Whether that person ever saw your design or not is irrelevant. So when you register it, you also gain protection in that sense. Now, you can register a design both for 3D and 2D designs. So it can be surface decoration, say, or it can be a 3D design for something. Something can be the shape of a car, I don't know, a toddler buggy or anything else. So it's pretty wide, the definition of what is a product for these purposes. And last but not least is trade secrets. A trade secret could be anything, customer lists, for example. But when would that be most relevant, I suspect, for you, is if you have an idea and you need help or you need a partner, a strategic partner, and you try to gain their interest. Well, how do you protect yourself during this phase when you go and you sit with that person and you tell them, look, listen to this is really great. They can listen to that and will say, well, thank you very much, it's really great, but now I don't need you anymore. All right? And they go elsewhere. So what do? This is where trade secrets come into into play, or may come into play, and not too complicated NDA, that stands for non-disclosure agreement, right? Can be very, very useful. And I think, did I finish my time? I finished my 10 minutes. Okay. So with respect to trade secrets, it can be either in this level or either when two artists are working and each of them is disclosing to one another. And again, it doesn't have to be anything artistic. It can be something like a customer list. It has commercial value in it. It would put your a competitor at an advantage if they would be aware of who are your customers, not to mention how much they pay. I mean, think about it. They can just then approach them and say, I know that you're paying Noam this and that for this. I'm going to give you the same thing, but minus 5%. You can just go and chip at the customer base of a company or a business, and it can be a tiny business. It doesn't matter. Yes, think about registration when it's possible, especially when we are not talking about patents. A lot of it is quite affordable, relatively speaking. Look after your secrets. Secrets are the valuable parts of your business, which are not there out in the open. And I think that's about it for now.
I'm going to throw it open straight away. I can see we've got some starters.
So we're in a creative environment, and I guess most of us are charities, and I guess a lot of us, because we're here, I think we want to be sharing a lot of our knowledge. And I guess some of these kind of copyright or trademark kind of doesn't feel like it aligns ideologically in a way, but I guess maybe like the Creative Commons might be a bit more useful, I don't know, for creative organisations, because we can still share that knowledge, but it can be reused, but not misappropriated.
Well, you determine.
I'm just going to repeat for the camera. So the question is really, if you're working in the spirit of sort of sharing and generosity, what's the best model to still protect your interests but enable kind of collaborative and generous working?
I guess it depends how generous you feel. But Creative Commons is a good example as to when and how you can use IP. In the case of Creative Commons, it's copyright. It's only copyright, really. In order to decide exactly as I said, how generous do you feel? So how much do you want to give? So for example, I'm very comfortable with people taking my stuff no matter what. Or I'm very comfortable for you to take my stuff, use it or modify it, as long as it's not for a commercial purpose. So the minute you start making money out of it, I would like to have a cut. So come to me for a license if it's for commercial, and so on. So you're definitely using IP, but you can decide how and when would you'd like to be generous. And I think Creative Commons licenses are an excellent thing. They're very self-explanatory, so the types of the licenses that you have there, it's complete. It's designed for people who have nothing to do with law. Just go there, read it, and they have also case studies, so it's a good thing. It's a good tool.
So if I go to Sarah.
Just as you said, licensing was the thing I was interested in, because we've had quite a few challenges, because I work in a theatre company where we have multiple owners of IP. And also there's this assumption around IP having a value, but actually it will cost you more to exploit it than it will to use it, and that someone else being able to exploit it, you could get that return. And I found the licensing model really useful because people then are sharing something that's not being exploited or commercialised, but as soon as that commercial conversation comes in, you have an approvals process in place that everyone has to sign up to that's really fair. And I think that sometimes I think we talk about IP that with the value on it before it's even been costed or has a market share or has a, or as I say, as a theatre company, we'd need to then spend $1 million investing in the skills to exploit an IP that someone else can exploit on our behalf. And it's the control bit that I feel, this perception around IP is also a challenge. Do you see what I mean?
So it's a question really, or an observation around, firstly, appropriate methods when work's being co-authored and co-created, and then a kind of an approach that's commensurate with the sort of cost of protecting the work versus the amount of value it's going to generate in return.
In cost, it's right. It's the just to give you an example, the price or the cost of instigating or initiating a court action in this country, it's when it comes to IP, it's unbelievable. And due to a change that happened only in the last few years, it has become it's more affordable. But when I'm talking about affordable, I mean prepare yourself for the minimum 5 figures, just legal costs. Go to the high court as you used to go just up until a few years ago. Yeah, it's definitely in the 6. I'm talking about simple, not a complicated technical patent case. There, 7 and even 8. Just legal costs. Yeah.
It's definitely.
It's a similar but not the same question or observation. It's that we're a theatre company, Nottingham House Theatre Company, and we make work. And sometimes we commission it, but that's more straightforward. We commission, the rights are all set out, and we know when we participate, and it's all easy. Often you produce a version of a production, you have the underlying rights for an amount of time, and your value is in your production, and your production is you put together uniquely this combination of designer, this director, this lighting designer, and so on and so forth. As an industry, the theatre industry is absolutely rubbish at valuing that. And I'm just interested to know ideas for moving that forward, because if you compare it to other things like people who design video games, I think it's a clearer process. This has a value, not because we invented this, but because we made the live experience. And it's also complicated because it's a live experience, so it's not a beautiful tapestry, and it's not a piece, it's not a video game. It's something ephemeral, it's not an artwork, except it is, because it's live. It's complicated, and it feels to me it shouldn't be this hard. But I see all over the place people letting the rights go for 0.5% here and 0.5% there, and oh well, it's great, take it off our hands, just give us a little something. I'm just really curious to know what are there other parallels in terms of IP that deal with something that's live, that is a combination of different artistic voices, but that values what they've made properly.
It's good. Why do you think? So what I would be interested in relation to your query is where do you see the failure in terms of your lack of ability to exploit it properly? Is that?
It's in getting people to pay what it's worth. And I'll give you an example at the moment. We've got a show on Broadway. It's just closed on Broadway, okay? And this just shows how widespread the problem is. The producers have come back to us, but it's been running on Broadway since May, and said, oh, do you know what, it hasn't taken as much as we thought, would you take half your fee? You know, and that has happened to everybody in theatre. So we've gone, no, we bloody wouldn't, unless you're doing the same thing with Chatham House, with your actors, your this, with everyone else. They've all done that, we'll consider it, but it's absolutely endemic, that's how it is. And I feel as an industry, the theatre side of things, we've just got to ratchet out. So trying to find examples of other people that just don't put up with that pressure.
Sounds almost something for social scientists rather than a lawyer. I mean, no. Why would someone sell? To an extent, you said you're selling yourself cheap. When the value, putting value stage comes, it's. I never thought about it, to be honest with you. It's an interesting
research project emerging.
No, it's interesting. You feel that sometimes people are just happy to be on the big stage, and that's the reward in its own, in its own right, and that's, yeah, again, probably more social science, interesting.
Can I just raise the issue of enforcement? I mean, we're a reading charity, and we run a books on prescription scheme, and the bit of the scheme that we've been able to copyright, because we have an IP lawyer on our board, is the curated book list. Because the book list is a database, so we've been able to copyright that. But actually, although we've copyrighted it, what's happened is somebody's taken that in another country and rolled it out, and we can't afford to do anything about it.
Okay.
We've talked about licensing, we've talked about various fees, and they say, oh yes.
Which country, by the way?
Australia. Just for the recording, it's a question around if you have been diligent
and how you enforce it.
Exactly, and you know, protected yourself. When is the enforcement viable or worth it, I guess?
Okay, I'll tell you what I sometimes tell my student. Before I put on the academic hat, I used to practice for a good few years in that area, so I remember that very well. The fact that somebody violates your IP doesn't mean that it makes sense for you to actually enforce it. Costing is one of the issues. In today's age, digital media and so on, PR. So if you're big and strong and fat and you're going after, you know, someone who has some small cottage industry, you can have a viral kind of campaign against you in social media as to, and you're getting nothing out of it. So I don't know who is the person, because in Australia this thing is enforceable, I have little doubt. Whether it makes sense for you financially to do that, it depends how deep the pockets of that body are.
It's cost us a lot of investment of time and resource to create this.
Look, generally you would go to a firm here and tell them, talk to your correspondents in Sydney or in Melbourne, that's the person, and send a cease and desist letter with an offer to license for that fee, and if not, to stop immediately, or else we'll see him in court. And whether financially it makes sense for you or not, it depends who the person is, how valuable it is to them, because if it is, then it's worthwhile for you to go through that process, but it's a costing, yeah.
Sorry, I will kind of open out again in a second, I promise you, but just to ask Noam to clarify really, where do you cross that point where you move from having an idea to something that's protectable?
The risk of again sounding very lawyery, it really depends. It depends on the area. So for example, Nadia's area, even if the idea would be more specific, as long as they didn't copy either the fabric or the software, an idea in itself, an abstract or a detailed idea, is not protectable. The only thing, so a practical application of an idea can be protected under patent law when it is technical, right? And I'm really trying to reduce it to basic terms. Other than that, that's the kind of, so there are countries in the world, for example, very close to us on the other side of the canal, the channel, where there is a concept as unfair competition, right? Unfair competition, so where I appropriate where the value lies in your business, and your concept, business concept, as long as it's detailed enough, can be such a thing, then it can be actionable. By the way, it would also be much cheaper to enforce it there. It's another issue. So unfair competition law, so for example, the French have two concepts. One is called disloyal competition, and the other is parasitism. So you're a parasite. You saw what I'm doing, and you emulated it, irrespective of the fact there's no patent, no other things, such things. You have done that, and I'm taking you to court under that. So it's quite moral, if you would like. It's quite, and very alien to the legal system here, where moralistic values should play, in most cases, moral values should play no role in a commercial environment, because what is fair and what is just, you know, it varies. Well, if you want to be critical, you look at a French model, you can say it's almost biblical. You should not reap without sowing. It's this type of thinking which is behind it. But here, unfortunately, not a lot.
I was just wondering how protectable is a sort of a methodology or a practice where the component elements obviously would probably exist elsewhere, you know, mentoring or whatever it might be, but actually
the way that you've structured them within your particular programme, the methodology you put together, probably accompanied by resources and things you've created, is that protectable? If you were then planning and thinking about licensing that or franchising that to others, where would you stand legally?
So that's a question around how possible it is to protect a process or a methodology that's been created by an organisation.
Yes, so staying at the same very general level that you have described it, the fact that you're using generic components but you are putting them together in an original way is fine. Again, as I said, if it's not technical, your only recourse would be trade secrets, and that is relevant only if it is something that you can keep in-house. If you can keep it in-house by the nature of the thing, then you sign everyone that work for you on you know, their employment contract would have a confidentiality clause, right? I'm simplifying things, and you put the restriction, you define what is the trade secret or the protected know-how, and you can get away with it like this. But if it is a process that by the very nature of the organization is out there in the public, so anyone can see it, learn it, and emulate it.
But what if you're licensing it or franchising it, so therefore by the nature of it, you're going to have to share it with the people?
Yeah, but you are doing it within a license, don't you? So
No, but what's to stop them, or is there nothing to stop them from?
the license.
So within the license.
Within the license, yes.
You need to use this after the licensing period.
Absolutely, and not only that, not only the term. You would say you are there. You are allowed to. You're permitted to use it for a very defined purpose, and you describe the purpose and you describe the term. So it's again.
If a similar thing pops up under a new name with that organisation, then you would be able to have recourse.
It would be a very interesting coincidence, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Stephanie.
It's only a really quick one. The cease and desist. Can you just send your own cease and desist letter? And if you do, does it work? Does it stand open now? Because it just feels like sometimes you just need to send someone a little warning shot, like I see you,
Yeah.
but I don't want to pay a lawyer.
So that's
Twitter's good.
Is it advisable to, you know, send your own warning shot across the bows? Is that effective?
Sometimes it will be. I mean, and it depends. I don't want to. You know, as a lawyer, I would write the letter without prejudice. So don't take me on my word here. I would say that in a lot of cases, yes. Sometimes, depending on the circumstances, you can shoot your own foot by doing that. The value, though, is that when you put someone, even if it's legally not impressive and you're using everyday work, you're putting someone on notice that they are infringing. That also means practically that in the future, if they would say, although intellectual property infringement is not knowledge dependent, so you don't have to know that someone owns the right in order for you to infringe it, but many times damages would be calculated from the point when someone became aware of it. So by putting someone on notice, you do better your position in that respect at least. So I would say that many times it can't hurt, but you have to judge on the case. Yeah.
Nadia just wanted to follow up on that, and then.
Sorry, I got one. So can I say what happened? It might be helpful. Okay. We got a cease and desist notice from a very small company based in Australia. Interestingly, around a particular. There was nothing to do with our core business, but one of the strands of an offshoot of our business. And it was not a lawyer's letter, it was from the company. We researched them, they were very small and very recently set up company. We did get initial legal advice, which wasn't very expensive, but we wanted to get that advice. But he said, on balance, you've got a better case as a company with a 21-year history. This is likely to be a warning shot, but if it's an offshoot, simply compromise with them on changing the name, because we wanted to keep it. We just stuck our company name in front of the words that they protected. And it was sorted out that way, but it wasn't worth us getting into, even with a small company, just in case they had a good lawyer. We weren't gonna get into it with them, so it did work.
I agree with that. That most lawyer advice we've had is that you need to find a way to start a negotiation to get through it, because the consequences, not just legally, but your brand and reputation, they are an IP and they are a brand value for you. And I think that our legal advice was always try and find the compromise of the way out. That was our advice. That's what I was giving.
Thank you. Nadia, you.
Well, social media can be quite interesting with these sorts of things. And when that happened to me, I went straight to Twitter. I just was flagging, I've seen this, I know it, and I just want everyone to know that this is what I'm doing, and let people come to their own decisions. I've had other designer friends that have had their literal designs stolen from bigger companies, and they've gone to social media and flagged it and been like, and they've sorted it out with the company straight away, because obviously it looks bad on their brand as well. So social media, I found, is quite a powerful powerful tool to help.
I had a question about when you employ people, so we have quite a pool of talented staff, and they create things while they're employed by you. Do they have any ongoing ownership over those ideas if they leave?
Okay, so if you're employing creative staff who are making creative works on behalf of the company, what happens to ownership of those? That's probably too much to deal with in sort of 4.5 minutes. But
I can try and do it very, very briefly. The distinction would be whether they're employees as the law, under labor law, what we consider to be an employee, or are they, is it a commissioned work? The fact that they work mainly for you doesn't mean that it's not a commissioned work. If it's a commissioned work, then they own the copyright, they own the trademark, and you had, I mean, just to give you an example, Doc Martin woke up one morning to discover a good few years ago that they actually don't own the Two Boots thing, because the agency that they employed years before employed someone on a commissioned work type of contract, and they never bothered to transfer the copyright, and that's a proper agency. So if it's a commissioned work, they own it, and therefore you want in the commission or in the commissioning a contract or agreement to make sure that the right come to you. If it's an employee, it should automatically reside with you. I mean, I would say why take the risk? You know, just put it in the contract.
I'm thinking more of talented people that maybe design a course or a process or something.
No, that's commissioned work to me. That's
Competitor organisation
no, that's a commissioned work. They own it. Not
even if they were a full-time paid employee.
And it was their job description to develop these types of programs.
Then, well, two things. The job description can be also a description for a commissioned work. What the court would ask is whether they were employees or, as we know under labor law, or not. So could they work for someone else during that time? If they save on materials, did they pocket the difference, or would you benefit from, you know, questions like this. I'm not a labor law lawyer, but I know enough only for these purposes. Yes, if it is an contract of employment, so there are employees and they're entitled to all the things that the law entitled them, then you own the copyright, and the same would probably go for designs. I would say just don't, you know, so you would have a clause, even if it's, you know, for the avoidance of any doubt, anyone, and so on, you know, would say.
You mentioned having confidentiality things in contracts as well.
But that's a different thing, yeah.
Could you put something in a contract about things you create while you're here?
But to be confidential.
Or in
I mean, if it's protected, if it's copyrightable, for example, you don't have, it doesn't have to be confidential.
Local authority.
Is it?
Yeah.
It's in mine.
Probably should be now.
This is an emerging area for further discussion,
indeed.
definitely. Are there any more burning questions?
I've got one just building on the project question. If you've got a live performance and it's kind of formatted a little bit, say like you would have a broadcast, is that copyrightable as a format in live events?
Okay, you'll have to educate me a little bit more about the format.
So, for example, if you're working a certain process and you have a process and it ends up in a live performance, and you go and repeat that process somewhere else as a production company, you've created a format.
Right.
Really, is that a licensable thing? Is it a copyrightable thing?
So,
itself?
right. The quick answer would be usually no, but the practice in the industry, and that's customary, is to buy formats. I mean, that's the way it works, and it still works like this. So it's just so as long as you're reasonable, if someone wants to take it, they would usually come to you and ask for permission, and permission is Permission is a license. A license is granted for money. So if it's really, really detailed, so it became a choreographed work, then it is protectable. So you basically micromanage the steps and the moves and the this on the stage and what have you. Then a choreograph, yes, would have protection under copyright for choreographic work. If it's just a format, which is something more abstract, more general, then usually not, although the custom in the industry is to ask for permission and to pay in return.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think we're going to have to stop there, except I'm going to use chair's privilege and just ask the same question to Noam and Nadia and ask them to answer in not more than 30 seconds. What do you think the most important thing for a small creative business to know about intellectual property is? From your point of view, Nadia.
What's the most important thing for a small business to know about intellectual property? Oh, I don't know. You've got me there. Stump me.
I'm going to stump both of them. That's quite.
I thought that 20 minutes. Oh, sorry, 10 minutes was.
Oh, can I say, do your research?
Yeah. So if someone's sitting here thinking, oh God, I've never even thought about intellectual property, what's the next thing they should do?
I actually think you kind of gave the answer. Is you have to think about it, and you have to realize, even when you don't know something, at least realize that you don't know it, because that has repercussions. So either I don't react, or I try and see if someone can, some people give pro bono advice. Get something to start with. Just guesstimating is risky.
Brilliant. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Nadia and Noam.